The Creature Files, presented by the Department of Mythical Wildlife, with your hosts, author Todd Calgi Gallicano, Christopher McClary at the Sightings Desk, and resident skeptic Vic Afsahi. So sit back and listen as we report the latest news and up-to-date information about the mythical creatures living among us. The Creature Files. It might just save your life.
Hey everyone, and welcome to The Creature Files, the show that's all about mythical creatures, and that includes cryptids as well as creatures from folklore, whatever might be lurking in the woods, in the waters, or in the skies above. I'm your host, Todd Calgi Gallicano, the author of the Sam Lennon Adventure Series from the files of the Department of Mythical Wildlife. And you can learn more about the series online at mythicalwildlife.com. We invite you to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode of The Creature Files. And now it's time to say hello to my co-hosts, Chris McClary at the Sightings Desk and our resident not-so-skeptic, Vic Afsahi. Hey, guys.
Hey, everybody.
Howdy.
Hey, onto my background. As many of you know, every Sam Lennon adventure features a few of our national parks. And to honor that, my background on the podcast will always be a national park. Any idea what it is this time, guys?
Is it the Ozarks?
It is not. Vic.
Appalachian Mountains.
No, it isn't. It's Lake Clark National Park and Preserve in Alaska.
Ah, my second guess.
And it is a land of stunning beauty. Volcanoes steam, salmon run, bears forage, and craggy mountains reflect in shimmering turquoise lakes. Lake Clark features an ecosystem at the headwaters of the largest sockeye salmon fishery in the world. There are no roads here. Traveling to the park requires a plane or a boat, so it's quite a commitment. There's plenty to discover about a park that encompasses over 4 million acres. It may not be easy to get to, but it offers a once-in-a-lifetime experience of true natural beauty. Okay, now it's time to get to our Sightings Desk. Anything sighted out there, McClary?
As a matter of fact, there is. Boy, where do I begin? Well, I can say this. I think I know what Bigfoot was doing during COVID. He was hitting the gym. We have a piece of footage, courtesy of NVTV on YouTube, and it is the most muscular Bigfoot, possibly the most muscular cryptid ever caught on camera. And it was caught in Idaho. There's only a few seconds, but if you see this Bigfoot footage is pretty intense. I mean, he looks like a linebacker. Take a look.
Yeah, we're playing it right now. You can see the Bigfoot walking. It's a very short clip, but yes, it's an extremely muscular Bigfoot. We might have found our next big action star. There are a lot of people online talking about this piece of footage, wondering whether or not it's authentic. Vic, what do you think?
Once again, an opportunity that seems to come around about once in a lifetime is squandered by shockingly short video by whoever took it. It's about 18 frames long, so it doesn't give you a lot to work with. But it's intriguing. It looks interesting. I just wish they'd had the presence of mind to maybe not edit out their friend walking around in a suit so that we could know that.
All right, I'll admit it's a little frustrating because it seems to be cut at a very peculiar time because we only get a couple of footsteps and then it's cut again. And like what happened for the seconds prior to this and the seconds after this, we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it just sort of lends itself to scream hoax when it's that precise in terms of the time. And it's not like the Bigfoot was like you just caught it in the distance, moving from one tree to another. It's out there, it's walking, and clearly there would have been a beginning and an end. And I don't think there has been any report as to where the footage came from necessarily and what the story was behind it and why it was so short. So it's interesting in the sense that whoever, did this has quite the costume or getup that they were working with, but you also wonder maybe it could potentially be CGI too. That's a possibility. The way I was reading something in a forum about the way the shadows were falling on it and such. So that's also a possibility. So maybe this is not something necessarily to get too excited about, but interesting nonetheless. Now on to the creature feature. Although sightings of a strange creature in Loch Ness have been traced back to the 6th century, the modern legend began in 1933 when a journalist and water bailiff, a sort of lake policeman, reported seeing a dragon-like monster in the famed body of water. Of course, since that initial report, the legend of the Loch Ness monster has spread far and wide, fueling stories in books, movies, and imaginations around the world. There have been more than 1,100 recorded sightings of Nessie to date, with the earliest dating back to 565 AD. Sightings of the Loch Ness Monster in 2021 have already reached the number recorded in 2020 after 2 more incidents were added to the official register. The creature itself is described as resembling a plesiosaur, an aquatic dinosaur with a long neck and 4 flippers. In addition to the hundreds of first-hand accounts, there are dozens of alleged photos and videos of the creature, and many searches have been undertaken in the lake to find Nessie. However, according to historians and scientists, there have been no definitive proof or confirmation of the creature's existence. But that isn't for a lack of looking. There's even a live webcam of Loch Ness where you can take on your own search for the mysterious creature. In fact, many of the sightings taking place today are from individuals who are watching the loch through the webcam, a sort of crowdsourcing of sightings. The real interesting discussion regarding Nessie is not in the sightings or the alleged pictures, but in the sonar data. And that brings us to this episode's guest. Ken Gerhard is a widely recognized cryptozoologist and field investigator for the Center for Fortean Zoology, as well as a fellow of the Pangea Institute and consultant for several research organizations. He has traveled the world searching for evidence of mysterious animals and legendary beasts, including Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, enigmatic winged creatures, and werewolves. In addition to co-hosting the History Channel TV series Missing in Alaska, he has appeared in episodes of the television series Monster Quest and is featured in the History Channel special The Real Wolfman, as well as other series including Ancient Aliens, True Monsters, Unexplained Files, Legend Hunters, Paranatural, Weird or What with William Shatner, and more. His credits include appearances on numerous news broadcasts and radio programs like Coast to Coast AM, as well as being featured in articles by the Associated Press, Houston Chronicle, and Tampa Tribune. He's also an author and has contributed to trade publications, including Fate magazine. He currently lectures and exhibits at various conferences and events across the United States. He has traveled to 26 different countries on 6 continents and has visited virtually all of the United States. His new book is The Essential Guide to the Loch Ness Monster and Other Aquatic Cryptids. It includes the most accurate and indispensable information that's been gathered with regard to the Loch Ness Monster, the best evidence supporting its existence, consensus expert opinions up to this point, the most compelling encounters, and really everything you need to know about the subject in order to become Nessie knowledgeable. All right, let's get to our guest. We'd like to welcome Ken Gerhard to the show. Ken, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you.
Now, I had the honor of seeing Ken talk at the North American Bigfoot Center, and it was a great presentation. And he talked a little bit about how he got into the world of cryptozoology, but I'm going to ask him to tell our audience sort of what brought you into this world. What happened? How did it happen?
Yeah, I think a lot of people obviously ask me that question. It is an unusual career choice. I didn't plan for it to be a career, though. It's just been a lifelong passion of mine. And what I always tell people is that about 8 or 9 years old as a young boy, it was kind of a synthesis of 2 different things that I was passionate about at that time. One was animals and creatures. My father was a forestry professor. We spent a lot of time in the outdoors, and I used to collect snakes and salamanders, and my first pet was a little alligator called a caiman. And so I loved all the creepy crawlies. And then but I was also raised on monster movies. So like Godzilla, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and you name it. So when I first heard about Bigfoot, I was about 8 or 9 years old. I saw a TV show, and, it was just like something clicked. I mean, here was like, could this thing really exist? This hairy man-like gigantic monster, is it really running around the wilderness areas of North America? And, it was kind of like it was a monster and an animal as far as I saw it, so, or an undiscovered animal. That's kind of how so anyways, it was kind of like, I absorbed everything I could from a young age, read every book I could on Bigfoot and all of these other Loch Ness Monster and all these other creatures. And then, but what was really key was that my mother was a very adventurous person, and she encouraged my interest. She used to tell me stories about the Mothman, the Yeti, and kind of stoked my interest. But she loved to travel. And so she took me with her all over the world. At a young age, I was camped along the Amazon River, and we hiked the Australian outback and traveled to Africa, Asia, and all these places. Wherever I went, I was always investigating whatever local creature legends, because wherever you go in the world, there's always some legendary local beast or creature in that culture. And then at age 15, my mother arranged for my father and I to go fishing or vacation at Loch Ness. So needless to say, I didn't do much fishing on that trip. We did a little, but most of the time I spent kind of hiking around the lake. I had a little 8mm movie camera just in case. And then I was interviewing all the local people in the villages and asking them about Nessie. So that was kind of like, you know, I was already attempting field research when I was very young. So it's just been a lifelong thing. And, you know, I got real lucky about 20 years ago when the internet started becoming a thing. I was able to connect with other Bigfoot researchers here in my home state of Texas. And so I was able to go out and start doing field work with them. And around that same time period, I wrote a book, and then I got on a TV show on the Travel Channel. So everything just kind of blew up about 20 years ago. And it's just been, it's been an amazing ride ever since.
I love that. I love that story about, you know, your mom sort of, you know, bringing you all of these places and encouraging you to investigate. It's like, you know, we had the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. I kind of want to see the Young Ken Gerhard Chronicles, where you were like this kid out there exploring these creatures and investigating. That's such a cool story.
Thank you. And I think she really wanted me to be an archaeologist. She was always taking me to ruins all over the world, Machu Picchu and Stonehenge and things like that. But I think she'd be proud of me now doing what I do, because, you know, she, like I said, she was very adventurous as well. So.
That's great. Now, there was one other part of your presentation that I also wanted to hit on, and that was when you talked about all of these sort of unexplored areas of the earth and the sort of undiscovered sort of species.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, because that was fascinating.
Well, thanks. Yeah. So some of the main pillars of my field of cryptozoology, which specializes in the search for undiscovered animals, presumed undiscovered animals, is twofold. One is that the world is still much more vast and unexplored than most people realize. I know it's easy to forget that in lieu of our, you know, the speed at which we can talk to people around the world and different things. But, you know, about 47% of the Earth's land surface is still considered a wilderness area. That's based on one recent survey. Wilderness area is essentially uninhabited by man. So if you think about all of the forests, mountain ranges, deserts, jungles, swamps, tundra, I mean, there's all kinds of places in the world that just aren't suitable for humans to go. So that does leave potential in terms of discovery. And then the other thing, of course, is that new species are being discovered all the time. So, you know, something like, you know, a few thousand every year are still described by science. Most of those are small things like mollusks and corals and bugs, but every once in a while there's some large, you know, amazing animal that's discovered somewhere in the world. So I think there is the potential there, you know, to make discoveries still, and I think that's easy to lose sight of. But
obviously, we wanted to have you on because we wanted to talk your book about the Loch Ness monster. And you know, hearing your story about, you know, you being a boy and fishing in Loch Ness. So is that where the fascination with the Loch Ness monster began? I'm guessing, and then what sort of brought you to the point that you sat down to write the book?
Well, I had read a lot about the Loch Ness monster before we actually made that trip. That was in 1982, and if you remember, I don't know, well, you guys are kids, you wouldn't remember, but in the late 60s, well, starting in the 60s and 70s, the Loch Ness monster was a really big deal. It was in the newspapers all the time, all over the world. There were a number of scientific expeditions that started taking it seriously in the early 1960s. There was some footage shot in 1960 by a guy named Tim Dinsdale that sort of re-inspired interest in the monster. It originally started back in the 1930s, and then Nessie kind of disappeared for a while, it seems. But and then in the early 70s, there was a team from Boston called the Academy of Applied Science, guys from MIT and some of these prestigious schools. A guy named Robert Rhines led them over there, and they were using state-of-the-art sonar and underwater photographic equipment with specialized strobe lights and things. And they started getting pictures of things under the water, and those are controversial still. But so yeah, anyways, so the 70s was a hot time for Loch Ness. So I was studying about Bigfoot and of course Nessie. So it's been a lifelong thing. But of course the research at age 15, that was a seminal event in my life, because it really showed me, wow, you can go around and ask questions about this stuff and try to, find answers and explore and investigate. But I'd always wanted to write a lake monster book. And then I finally, I call The Essential Guide to the Loch Ness Monster and Other Aquatic Cryptids my pandemic book, because it was my pandemic project, because literally the day the pandemic, I'd already been thinking about this book idea. And then the day that everything kind of shut down in March of 2019, I thought, well, I'm going to be inside for a while, so I'm just going to write a book and that'll keep me sane. And so anyways, yeah, the book was fun for a number of reasons, but one of which was that it's a broader than just the Loch Ness Monster. There are other lake monsters around the world, and also things in the ocean called sea serpents that I think they're all connected. And I think the evidence shows that. And the other thing was that I got to interview a lot of colleagues who I really admire and respect. So anybody that I knew that was very knowledgeable in lake monster research, a lot of my colleague cryptozoologists and lake monster researchers, I interviewed them and, learned quite a bit from them as well. So
we've actually covered a few of those lake monsters like the Ogopogo and, and such. And I want to talk about those, but I was curious. So have you ever had an encounter or experience in these locations where lake monsters are, where you thought maybe you sensed something or saw something or anything?
I have not. I've done research at Loch Ness. I've done some lake monster research in Eastern Canada, Igopogo, which is a lesser known lake monster, some lakes in Wisconsin where there have been some sightings, and a place called Raystown Lake up in Pennsylvania. And then here in Texas, I've searched for, we don't have as many Nessie type lake monsters, but there are legends and stories of car-sized catfish and things like that we've searched for. But I honestly had never been to Okanagan. I've never been to Lake Champlain. So I really need to up my lake monster resume, and, maybe as the world normalizes a bit, I'll make more attempts. Oh, I also forgot about Lake Iliamna in Alaska, which was a subject of a show I did called Missing in Alaska for the History Channel. But we did a famous lake monster up there named Illy. So yeah, I need to do more. There are a lot of logistical issues with searching for lake monsters as opposed to other cryptids because they're under the water. So you got to have better equipment, sonar, underwater cameras, and hydrophones and things like that. So it can be a little pricier. So maybe that's a little tiny obstacle, but we'll overcome that somehow.
Well, that brings me to my next question, which is, what do you consider the most intriguing piece of evidence or body of evidence with regard to the Loch Ness Monster?
Well, if you were going to say specifically around Loch Ness, I would say probably the Dinsdale footage, which I mentioned earlier from 1960, which is the first film where you can see this thing moving. But really, I think the most forgotten line of evidence, and I read about this in the book, is this sonar evidence. I mean, a lot of people focus on these alleged Nessie photographs, and we know now that a lot of those have actually been hoaxed through the years. That's become a big deal. Some are intriguing, but none of them are conclusive. But in terms of the sonar evidence, there have been sonar hits recorded in Loch Ness going back to 1952, and consistently every few years when someone mounts a serious sonar investigation with a lot of units, or sometimes these things are just contacted by accident, but literally, over the past 60, 70 years, there have been hundreds of contacts of large animate objects in the lake, 20 to 30 feet long, and nobody knows what they are. So, I mean, to me, that's okay. There's something big moving around down there. Now, I'm not a sonar expert, but some of these analysis has been done by companies like Lowrance in Norway, and some sonar companies here in the U.S. and labs that specialize in interpreting this data. And moreover, a lot of the data has been collected by universities in England and pioneers in the sonar industry. So I don't know. It's people don't realize that there's a lot of contacts of large things swimming around in Loch Ness, and those haven't been properly explained.
Yeah, and it's kind of been in the news a lot recently because I guess people have been stuck at home and they've been watching the webcam and reporting sightings. There was a sighting reported by someone in China who was watching the webcam. I think it was the furthest there had ever been a sighting of the Loch Ness monster. And you're following that sort of unfolding story.
Yeah, that is people that can actually. I'm glad you brought that up. There have been for years now websites where they offer stationary webcams around Loch Ness, and they invite people at home to just put it on and watch, and just maybe you'll see something. Who knows? I guess it happens once in a while. So that's kind of fun now that we can actually be sort of sitting at home and relaxing, looking for cryptids at the same time. It's cool.
Totally. And okay, so this is the big question. What do you think the Loch Ness monster is?
Well, I do have a theory that I mentioned in the book, and this is just this is all a speculation, really. I mean, we don't have enough hard evidence or enough evidence period to really say conclusively what these things could be. But if you go based on the eyewitness accounts, which are pretty consistent, and they date back, almost a century, if not more, in terms of lake monsters. Actually, if you consider the sea serpents, things sighted in the ocean that are probably the same, pretty consistent, long serpentine animals with smooth, dark skin. And they move up and down like this when they swim on the surface of the water. This is a vertical undulation. Now, to me, that's key because that is a mammalian characteristic. Only mammals swim up and down like that. Reptiles and fish flex, and amphibians flex side to side or horizontally. That's the way they're designed. And mammals go up and down like seals, pinnipeds, and otters, and even whales. So I think it's a mammal. And a large mammal. And I think the fact that they're serpentine is just an evolutionary design. And there was actually an ancient type of whale back in the Eocene and Oligocene epochs about 40 million years ago. You had these long snake-like whales called basilosaurs or archaeocetes. And they were kind of like a dead end in whale evolution, but they were around for a while. And they had a much longer vertebral column than the modern whales. They didn't look like a lot like modern whales, maybe a little bit, the skin. But anyways, that's one theory. I'm not really an advocate of the giant reptile plesiosaur marine saurian, because usually these things are sighted in very cold lakes, and cold water is not conducive to reptiles. They're cold-blooded animals. So I don't know. That it seems like that seems to me like the most probable thing. And I'm not the first guy that thought that. I mean, that identity has been proposed at various times throughout the years by other cryptozoologists and researchers. So.
No, I love that particular point of the up and down undulation, because a lot of times with lake monsters, people sort of dismiss it. Skeptics will dismiss it as, oh, it's like an alligator gar or something like that. But those are fish, and they move differently than what we've come to know about sort of the Loch Ness monster and some of these other creatures with that up and down motion. So that's a great point.
Yeah, well, certainly some lake monsters might actually be things like giant catfish and alligator gar. So there are some sightings that might not fit into this Nessie type category. But again, I encourage readers to read the book, and I always try to be as objective as possible in how I present the material so that the reader can decide for themselves if they even think the Loch Ness monster does really exist. And some of these others, we don't really know 100%, but and the other things that I forgot to mention is, I mentioned that these things have been sighted in the ocean too. And a lot of these lakes are not only very cold and deep, but they're also connected to the ocean by a series of rivers, Champlain, Okanagan, Loch Ness, and some of these others around the world. So whales, cetaceans, have been known to travel from the ocean into fresh water on occasion. Pilot whales and other cetaceans will do that. It's called anadromous. So, I mean, that's another kind of, I think, an interesting coincidence.
That's great because, a lot of times when I think about a lake, you kind of think about it being sort of landlocked in some way. And so you wonder, well, is it connected to the ocean? Where's it coming? Where's the water? Is it just sitting there? Are there rivers? There's those kinds of things. But I'm glad you mentioned that because, a lot of times we don't realize that they connect.
Yeah. Now, in terms of Loch Ness, I mean, admittedly, it's connected on both ends, but the rivers, canals, streams, and even ship locks along the way are, a lot of it's pretty shallow water and it's very visible. So that's kind of a mystery. Is like, if these things were traveling to Loch Ness, which would explain why they're only sighted, on certain occasions and not all the time because they're traveling back and forth to the ocean. But they would have to travel through some pretty shallow water in parts, and presumably by a lot of people on the shoreline. So that kind of puts a dent in my hypothesis. There are about 36 reports of these things on land around Loch Ness out of 3,000 accounts. So it's a very small percentage. So I don't know if we can put a lot of weight into the land sightings around the shore, but that's another thing is, well, if these things could be a little bit amphibious and they can wiggle across, the ground for a very short distance from water to water, A to B, I don't know, but it's a fun mystery to explore. Yeah.
And the other question that often comes up is sort of, is there more than one? Is it, is there, does it reproduce? Are we looking at the same one that was here, in 1933? Like what's happening with that aspect of it?
Well, yeah, I think zoologically speaking, there's no doubt there would have to be several of them. Excuse me. And, it's doubtful we would be do the same creature after decades and decades. Unless on the very, very odd chance it was something like a Greenland shark that, Greenland sharks are these massive sharks that live in the Arctic Ocean and they can live for like 400 years. And they also are used to very cold water, and some sharks, similar sharks, have come into brackish water. So, I mean, I don't think Nessie is a giant shark. I think that was a Josh Gates thing on one of his shows that he tried to, or maybe it was Jeremy Wade. I think maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I think Jeremy Wade, one of those guys, kind of emphasized the Greenland shark theory. And then the only other way that it would live that long would be if it was an ancient reptile, which, because sea turtles can probably live a long time, things like that. I don't know. But I think viably speaking, there would have to be a population. Now, what that population is in terms of having genetic viability and being able to reproduce and, male meet female in a whatever designated location, I don't know. That's some pretty wild speculation. But, at one time in the 70s, when there were some traditional zoologists and marine biologists looking at the Loch Ness issue, they proposed a herd of Nessies of like at least a dozen individuals, to have sustained a population in Loch Ness for over a long period of time. And, that would certainly involve some inbreeding as well, which is not always a good thing for a species, but, I don't know. There's got to be more than one. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And now in the book, you mentioned that you talk about other lake monsters. Were there any other lake monsters that you covered besides Nessie that really caught your interest, that you really got intrigued by?
Yeah, I've been kind of intrigued with a lake monster up in Montana called Flessie, the Flathead Lake Monster. And I guess the main reason is, well, one, Montana is one of two states that I haven't been to yet. I've always wanted to go there. I've been close, but I haven't quite made it to Montana. But the other thing is that I connected with a gentleman named Laney Hansel, who has documented all of the sightings of Flessie or the Flathead Lake Monster and mapped them. And he has actually worked on the lake for 30 years as a fisheries biologist, managing the fish populations. He never had a sighting, but he did pull in his nets a couple of times, and they had giant tears or holes in the nets that he couldn't explain. And he explained to me that half of the southern half of the lake is actually on the Flathead Indian Reservation. So it's not very accessible unless you have the permission of the tribe and different things. So I think it's a pretty big lake, pretty deep, but a lot of it is not seen. And the other thing was that I actually interviewed a guy that had a sighting of Flessie. I think it was number 213 that we added to Laney's map of this giant thing swimming in the water. So, you know, I don't know, I just felt a little bit more connected to that one because I was interviewing an eyewitness firsthand, a guy that had been researching it for years. And, you know, I think there could be potential there. It's similar to Lake Okanagan in terms of the geography, water temperature, fish species, and it's also connected to the Columbia River system, which feeds all those lakes up there. So,
okay. And I guess then one of the questions I like to ask is, if you had sort of an unlimited budget to mount an expedition into, let's say, the hunt for the Loch Ness Monster, how would you go about it?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, they did an eDNA study a couple of years ago. So 2018 and 19, a university from New Zealand did an environmental DNA study where they basically extracted like 250 water samples and then filtered out the biological material and then did DNA sequencing. And they were able to look at a lot of different types of animals that way. They didn't find anything unknown, which they kind of used as a bit of a proclamation that they had disproven Nessie or hadn't found Nessie. But I would continue that because to my understanding, DNA in the water does not last more than like a couple of weeks. So if something had moved out of the lake before that, then you would have a missed opportunity. But I think if you had a continual staged eDNA system around Loch Ness where you could continually extract that and test it just on the off chance that you found something interesting. The stationary cameras they've delivered a few intriguing photos, but considering how many cameras have been stationary around the loch and for how long and how many people are watching them, that's kind of surprising in it, but it just doesn't seem like a very fruitful, way to find evidence at this point. So I would say intensify the sonar and maybe find some state-of-the-art underwater photographic equipment. See, here's the thing about Loch Ness is the water is incredibly dark and silty and peaty. There's a lot of peat that runs down into Loch Ness. So even though it's very deep, like 754 feet deep, maybe 800 feet deep, visibility is very poor. And they've put little submarines in the loch, and they've used underwater cameras, but they've had to have these massive bright strobe lights. And, even then they could only capture something that was, 20 feet away from the camera. So I don't know, that would be something, maybe we could use underwater thermal imaging or FLIR technology, because if Nessie is a warm-blooded animal, like I suspect, that it would give off a heat signature, and that way you wouldn't be limited. So there's basically, to answer your question, there's a lot of cool things you could do if the funding was there, I think, to intensify the search for Nessie and maybe come up with some conclusive answers.
So like even taking like a submersible down, it's probably, you're not going to see much because it's so dark. You'd have a big light, and that would probably negate the whole purpose of it, because if it was, something that was not going to be very, it could be hiding, it wouldn't necessarily come out to say hello.
They've tried that. Yeah, they've had a few submarines through the years that have gone down there with bright lights and things. And there were a couple times when they actually did track something on their sonar, but they tried to catch up to it, and the submarines were so slow compared to whatever it was that was swimming by that they weren't able to get close enough to it.
We need James Cameron to throw like $500 million at it.
He'd be the guy. I think so. Yeah. He loves things deep in the water, and he's got some coins. So
that's right. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and bring in my co-hosts, see if they have some questions. Chris, do you have any questions for Ken?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Todd. And thank you, Ken. Man, wow, what a pleasure it is to listen to you talk about these things here. I love your insights. Yeah, you really opened up my eyes. I love your take on distinguishing, reptiles from mammals in the water. Very cool. Also your childhood, man, that's the childhood of my dreams. I mean, I went out in my backyard every day, and I had a routine of turning over logs and rocks to see what was there. And I did it every day, sometimes twice a day. Just to, I was so into all that, but man, to have your backyard be like the world. Wow. That's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, like I said, I feel very blessed.
So I want your thoughts on this, because you seem to be pretty broad on all the aquatics. And we had a guest who spoke at length on kraken and sea squids, giant squids. So I just wanted to ask you if you could just kind of give us some thoughts on those two creatures.
Well, the giant squid is one of the darlings of cryptozoology, because it literally transformed from a legendary sea monster, the kraken in Norse mythology, into a actual species that was described by scientists starting in, I think, 1873 or something like that, when they could no longer deny it. There was kind of a period like there's now, where there were guys that were researching and finding accounts of giant squids that had washed up on the shore, and they would tell, finally a guy saved I think a beak. They have these parrot-like beaks, and but anyways, the scientists at that time period in the early 19th century were like, oh no, nothing like that could exist. And then, but sure enough, finally they started washing up on beaches and things, and so it was undeniable. So here you have an animal that I think we only videotaped it for the first time within the last 2 decades. But I mean, these things can get at least 50 feet long. They have an eye as big as a dinner plate. They have this giant parrot beak. They have the suckers on their tentacles are lined with little sharp teeth. I mean, they're crazy animals. I mean, they're monsters. They really are. But they live at such great depths, and I think they only come to the surface when they're dying or something. But yeah, so that's a kind of perhaps that was foreshadowing in terms of the lake monsters and the sea serpents, because the great sea serpents were being sighted by sailors in the 19th century, and right after the discovery of the giant squid, a lot of sort of romantic zoologists and marine biologists were looking ahead, saying, well, is this going to be next? Are we going to discover the great sea serpent, this massive, serpentine animal, whatever it is? So and yeah, there could be things even bigger than the giant squid down there. I mean, there's really no limitation on how large an invertebrate can get living in the deep expanses of the ocean. By the way, the Earth's oceans average about 12,000 feet deep. And so, I mean, they go down, some of them go down like 30,000 feet in trenches. I mean, that's crazy. That's like, wow. Anyways, it really makes you wonder what could be down there.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting case, and I write about it in the book. There potentially was a giant monstrous octopus that washed ashore in St. Augustine, Florida, back in 1892, I believe. The St. Augustine monsters, it was called. At least one naturalist who studied its body for days was convinced it was the remains of this giant octopus that would have been like 100 feet long from tip of the tentacle to the that there was some in recent years there have been some DNA tests done on some samples that were saved from that time, and it seems like was probably just whale blubber. I mean, that's where it's, but there were a couple of biologists that looked at the tissue under other circumstances. I forget what they call it, some kind of microscopic analysis where they put chemicals and anyways, they said it looked like a squid, an octopus. So, you know, who knows? Maybe there's a giant octopus down there that rivals the giant squid. It's not impossible.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you.
Now, Chris, you've been to Loch Ness. Did you?
Yes.
What was your experience?
Oh man, yeah. About I don't know 6 or 7 years ago, I was in. Oh no, about 4 years ago, I was in northern Scotland, and I made it a point. It was actually the primary reason I was up there was to visit the loch, and it was just such an enchanted experience to ride the boat across the loch. You know, down across the loch, and yeah, the water. It is enchanting. It is eerie. You know, there's a castle of ruins right there overlooking it, just poised, perched on the edge, and I think one of the biggest shockers to me was when they said how deep it is, 700-800 feet deep in some places. That is just hard to imagine what could be down there. And that you're just on this little tiny boat floating across the surface, and with all the lore surrounding it and all the history, it's a magnificent experience. Yeah, I made it a point to get up there. And it's not necessarily easiest, to get from Edinburgh. You got to really take a day off and take a tour or rent a car or something, because it's a full day. But man, was it worth it?
It's great. Yeah, it is. It has a magical something about it. It's very enchanting, like you said. The mist shrouded hills and the castle ruins, and there's supposedly this mythical beast that lives in the lake. So I do, even if people don't believe that Nessie could exist, I would still recommend a trip up to Loch Ness just to enjoy it.
You know it.
Vic, do you have any questions for Ken?
Yeah, and once again, thank you, Ken, for being with us. This is really cool.
Absolutely.
So in all of your adventures, tracking, reading about, researching cryptid, is there one cryptid that kind of sticks out as probably being the most, like having the highest probability of still thriving in today's society?
Yeah, people ask me that. The most probable cryptid, in my opinion, is something called the thylacine or Tasmanian tiger, which supposedly went extinct in 1936. Officially was labeled extinct in 1982, even though there hadn't been sightings for years. But down on the island of Tasmania, south of Australia, this thing sadly was driven to extinction by some really stupid people back in those days that just, put bounties out on them and killed them for no reason. But anyways, I digress. It looked like a wolf, but it was actually a marsupial. So it's closer to a kangaroo, or its closest living relative is a Tasmanian devil. But this thing was much bigger. It had stripes on its back, which is why they called it a Tasmanian tiger. Had a very wolf-like appearance, but it was an example of what we call convergent evolution, where something evolved to look like something else, even though they're not really that closely related. But I don't know. There have been hundreds of sightings through the years. Tasmania is a pretty remote island still, lots of wilderness area. There have been a lot of sightings, including by wildlife workers and park rangers down there who are skilled observers. And there are some kind of intriguing, controversial photos and videos. But yeah, I think that there could still be a population of those animals, probably somewhere out there. I'd love to go look for it. It's on my bucket list. Number 2 is a small sort of Bigfoot. Well, let's say a small foot type creature that's been reported from the island of Sumatra in Indonesia. And this is something called the orang pendek, or the short man. And it's been connected to Bigfoot superficially because it seems like it has some very ape-like features and it walks upright. But most of the eyewitnesses and accounts describe it as standing only about 3 to 5 feet tall. So it's like a pygmy-sized Bigfoot type thing. And I haven't been there looking for it, but some of my colleagues and friends have, and they think, based on the evidence, that it could be something like a bipedal orangutan or something like that. Not really a Bigfoot, but more like a species of ape that hasn't been discovered. So those are kind of my top 2. And then, I give Bigfoot and its cousins around the world, the Yeti and others a high probability of existing based on the evidence I've looked at through the years. And same with the Loch Ness monster and some of these other lake monsters. I think the evidence is pretty strong. Granted, I'm not officially a scientist, and I've never discovered a species before, but I've been researching these things for decades, and I've interviewed hundreds of witnesses, and it just seems like there has to be an explanation.
Yeah, very cool.
Good question, though.
With like the Bigfoot category of cryptids, some people ascribe to sort of a high strangeness factor, where maybe they travel by portals, or do you lend any credibility to that, or you think it's a possibility?
That's the number one question that I'm asked pretty much anywhere I go. No, it's fascinating. For me, it's fascinating from a sociological perspective. But I don't personally, based on the evidence that I've seen through the years, I don't advocate that, because the strength of evidence just isn't there. The data doesn't support that. The only and it's complete. It's a complete inference, but people that take that position, it's because we haven't found Bigfoot yet. Well, there's no reason why we haven't found Bigfoot or found a body or gotten a good photograph. So it's got to be interdimensional, which to me is a leap,
Yeah.
Because we don't even really know if other dimensions really exist. It's a good theory, and who knows, but now there have been some strange accounts, and but they make up such a very small percentage of the big picture of Bigfoot evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, the vast majority of people I've interviewed, the vast number of eyewitness accounts, and there are thousands of them, describe an animal crossing the road at night in front of a car. That's the number one. People see it crossing the road in the headlights. Number two, people see it walking in the woods. It's peeking behind a tree. It's drinking water. It's chasing a deer. I mean, those are all, that's like the vast majority. But then again, I haven't, walked in anyone else's shoes. And what I tell people is that I'm a very open-minded person, and I am open-minded to all types of things going on around us on our planet that we don't understand yet. So maybe there is a sort of metaphysical phenomenon or something that feels like Bigfoot. That's what I tell people. Maybe it manifests in a way that people interpret as Bigfoot, even though it's not related to what I think Bigfoot is, which is just an undiscovered hominid, something from our, prehistoric lineage.
Yeah.
Good question, though. I mean, it's people bring it up all the time because it is.
Yeah,
compelling.
it's interesting to see the split.
And the one thing I'll say, and I said it was a sociological question to me, because it seems like the vast majority of people that ask me that question already have a form of confirmation bias, because they're either paranormal ghost hunters or UFO investigators. So interdimensional, that's my thing, So
Exactly.
let me put Bigfoot in there too.
Yeah, the area of interest. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, and not to make light of it. Everybody's different. We all have our different biases and opinions, but all humans display a thing called apophenia, which is a psychological thing. It's related to pareidolia, but apophenia is a condition whereby humans feel a need to connect things meaningfully.
Right.
And say, okay, and it makes sense in terms of mysteries, because it's like, this is the way our brain has evolved. But if you've got mystery A, mystery B over here, and it's like, oh, I can't make sense of any of these, something about our brain wants to connect those two mysteries, and now it makes a more manageable thing. Okay, I've only got one mystery. It's Bigfoot, UFOs, or whatever. I don't know. I mean, that's just that's the way I see it. But again, point. I don't know. I mean, show me the data, show me the evidence that Bigfoot's coming from another dimension, and I would readily accept that if anyone could prove that.
Right on.
Great answer. Great. I loved all that.
Vic, you got anything else?
Yeah, one last thing. Some of our guests that do like extended hunts or investigations, some of them inevitably experience something really either crazy or strange or very scary that happens to them. Have you had anything scary happen to you out there?
Well, I have the what I consider to be my most probable Bigfoot encounter, which was pretty intense. And I write about this in my book, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot. But in August of 2003, I was with 3 other investigators at a place called Cottonwood Lake in North Texas, pretty remote location. We were there investigating some Bigfoot sightings. Just after the sun went down, we heard something grunting at us from the brush. And I recorded it because I had my camcorder going, and it sounded just like a giant ape. I mean, it was literally like, it was a primate sound, like an ape. You would hear at the zoo, like a gorilla or something like, that's what it sounded like to me. We didn't know what it was. We couldn't see it because it was in heavy brush. So one of the guys in our group, who was a pretty accomplished hunter and outdoorsman, had a shotgun, and his idea was, well, I'll flesh it out and then you guys fan out. I had a camera with night vision and a couple other guys had, so let's see if we can flesh this thing out. So, I was just kind of, I wasn't armed at that time. I always have a machete, but that's it. But I had my camera and I was like, okay, well, this may be how I die, but at least I'm going to be the famous guy that got the footage of the Bigfoot pummeling him to death. So we tried to flesh it out, but we couldn't do it, or he kind of lost his nerve, which I can completely understand, because he had to go like crawl on his belly to get through this thicket. And he's like, man, this is a vulnerable position for me. We went up on a bluff or a levee overlooking the lake, and we shined a spotlight down where we had heard this thing, and we saw eye shine, yellowish green eyes, very high off the ground. It was hard to tell exactly how high, but we thought, okay, that's got to be it looking at us. And then we went back and made camp, and right near that location, hoping other activities would happen. And we did hear this thing. It seemed to have moved across the lake, and it was kind of making a howling sound, more like a moan, really, like a roar kind of sound. And we would answer back, and it would talk to it for a while. And then eventually that ended. And then the next morning, we made our way through that brush where we had heard this thing initially. And we found some very deep human-like footprints in the sand. It was a beach on the lake. And we found a number of turtle shells, turtles about this big, like these big red-eared slider or map turtles, had been torn in half, top to bottom. And so there was like 2 halves of a turtle shell, and that was like a little pile of those. And that was,
wow.
That is wild.
Just as I'm talking about, I've owned a lot of turtles in my life, and you can't imagine anything being strong enough to pull a turtle shell apart. So anyways, all of that was pretty intense that whole night.
That is very intense.
And that was one of the, the moments where I was like, wow, there's got to be something to this.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of any other explanation.
Yeah, that's a lot of smoke.
Like Bigfoot. So
very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
Now we talked a little bit about sort of the the paranormal Bigfoot aspect. You have done have you done any investigation into Mothman at all? Because I feel like people don't really consider that a cryptid necessarily. It seems a little bit more, a more of a paranormal kind of creature. Where do you sort of fall in that debate?
Yeah, definitely metaphysical, and I've got a book. It's unfortunately out of print, but I might be bringing it back, about Mothman and other flying humanoids. I've interviewed a lot of flying humanoid witnesses. So again, Mothman is not just Point Pleasant, but things like Mothman have been sighted all over North America, Mexico, all over the world, really. And you can actually find traditions of them and depictions of them going back to ancient Assyria thousands of years ago, winged humanoid creatures. So, but it doesn't fit into the paradigm of zoology at all. Now, you said some people, I don't really consider it technically a cryptid, but it's kind of a fringe cryptid. And the reason it became that way is because initially when some people saw the Mothman back in the late 1960s, some of the eyewitnesses said it was just a giant bird. And in fact, the newspapers at that time called it the bird before the name Mothman was invented. Although other people said, no, this wasn't a bird. It had these giant red glowing eyes and flew at impossible speeds and things. So it kind of became investigated by cryptozoologists early on, because it's like, well, wow, maybe this is like a giant species of bird, like a thunderbird, which is a whole nother topic we could get into. But I had opportunities to travel to Point Pleasant starting in, I think, 2009. And I was already interviewing some flying humanoid eyewitnesses. And I haven't gone into the phenomenon as deep as obviously someone like John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies, or even a few other authors that have gone really all in on that mystery. But it seems to be something metaphysical. I mean, the physical descriptions don't match anything in the natural world and the fossil record. This thing moves at impossible speeds. It hypnotizes people with its giant red eyes. UFOs are seen in the sky over where it's been seen. Men in Black come and visit eyewitnesses and tell them to shut. I mean, it's just like all these facets of just high strangeness. So that, to me, it's a fascinating mystery, and it's pretty complex. And of course, the tragedy of the Silver Bridge collapse, 1 year, 1 day, 1 year, 1 month, 1 day after the first Mothman sighting. That was very, very sad. And a lot of people associate that with Mothman as well. So it's got all these layers. I don't think any longer, I don't think it's a thunderbird or a giant bird. And it seems to be something that's reported all over the world by people. And there you can make your case, Vic, that here's something that could be definitely, if you want to say interdimensional, some people say demonic, or, people have different ways of viewing these kind of non-corporeal entities and apparitions, but it's a weird creature that appears and then vanishes somewhere. So
now in the book series I've written, the Sam Land Adventure series, there's a lot of it features a lot of our national parks. Now, I imagine you've been to a lot of national parks. Are there any particular national parks where there's a large amount of cryptid sightings that you've been to investigate, or anything strange in any national parks you've been to?
That's a good question. I don't. Well, I mean, just recently, in the beginning of July of this year, I traveled up to the Trinity National Forest in Northern California, which was kind of like a cryptid twofer. On the one hand, it's the area where you find Bluff Creek, which is where the famous Patterson-Gimlin footage from October 20th, 1967 was filmed, of the Bigfoot walking away from the camera. And also the first Bigfoot footprints were found in that same area back in October of 1958. So that was kind of like ground zero for Bigfoot. And there's a little town there called Willow Creek. And when you go through Willow Creek, everything is Bigfoot. Bigfoot burgers, Bigfoot books, Bigfoot motel. It's all just this little fun little town, this vibey little town, and it's all an homage to Bigfoot. But we were also there searching for cryptid giant salamanders that have been reported, that are said to be anywhere from 5 to 8 or 9 feet long, monstrous salamanders, and been sighted in that same area through the years, and certainly haven't gotten the publicity that Bigfoot has. But we were searching for evidence of these monster salamanders in a remote area up there in that national forest, and we didn't find any. Unfortunately, we found some, Pacific giant salamanders, which are really, despite the name, they're only about maybe 8 or 12 inches long. But anyways, that was kind of a cool, hey, there's 2 kind of pretty cool cryptids in this particular area. And when you get up there, you realize how remote it is. It is a very vast, I mean, some of those forests that we were in were like primordial, like there'd never been any logging or development of any kind. So you're basically looking at the same, stem forests that have been there since the Ice Age 10,000 years ago. So there are some cool spots here in North America still that are fairly untouched.
Hey, so Todd, I have a thought real quick. We haven't done this before on the show, but I thought it might be interesting to get his sort of impromptu reaction to the footage from our news desk, our sightings desk.
Oh, yes. So Ken, you might have seen it. There was that footage that just came out of, I think it was Idaho, of the really muscular Bigfoot. Have you seen
okay.
that?
I think I saw that on social media a night or 2 ago. Yes.
And so we have a part of the show what we call the sightings desk, where we talk about, things that pop up, the video and such. And I don't know if you had seen enough of it to kind of comment on it.
Admittedly, I'm not the biggest advocate for alleged photographic evidence, particularly with regard to Bigfoot. If it's too blurry, then it's like, well, you can't tell what that is. But if it's too good, then it's going to be like, well, somebody made that, it's a CGI or Photoshop or something. So how do you win? I mean, I don't know how you can win that.
This one looks like a hoax to me. I mean, it's the Bigfoot looks like we were joking. It looks like he should be the next big action star. He's like built, like super muscular, and it's only like a second of footage. And so it's like, well, what happened right before and what happened right after?
I was thinking of a still, but this is a video clip.
Yeah, it's a video.
I haven't seen this one. Yeah, that is mysterious. Why do these videos always, conveniently stop right when something is going to get good? When you're like, okay, I'm going to finally see what this looks like.
It's right before the suit falls off.
It just doesn't make sense that someone would film it in that way. So I don't know.
Well, I'll just say, it looks like Bigfoot spent the entire pandemic working out.
Yeah. He's got unlimited protein source. I can tell you that.
Curls with logs and things.
He's on serious keto.
Oh, that's good.
So I don't know if we have enough time, but I'm going to ask you sort of, what you're up to. But I love the story that you told. Sometimes you go out to investigate cryptids, and it doesn't turn out the way some people expect it to. Right? So like you've gone to to investigate something, and then find out it's not what.
Yeah, you debunk things. It's part of this process is finding real answers. So I think you're probably talking about the story. It is a long story, but a colleague and I went out to Florida to investigate supposedly this black panther, this giant mystery black cat that this hunter had filmed. And it turned out to be a house cat, and we were able to prove that using a model and surveying software. And the thing was only about 14 inches long, which he was making it out to be this giant. Anyways, but yeah, we were unceremoniously run out of town because that particular town had been trying to build this mystery cat into like their local Nessie, and they were trying to like have like t-shirts and bumper stickers and like something was going to be like an industry for the town. And then we proved, we didn't disprove that because people had been seeing or claiming they'd seen this giant black cat, like something like a leopard sized cat out there, and there's a lot of wilderness out there. So like, okay, yeah, maybe there could be something like that out here. We just debunked that one film, but yeah, they weren't happy about that.
How can people follow you?
I am on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just Google Ken Gerhard. I have a YouTube channel where I put up entertaining brief cryptid videos. I'm on Amazon. If people are interested in my books, just go on to Amazon.com. And I also have a website, KenGerhard.com.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an awesome conversation. We super appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me on, guys. Everyone have a good night. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That was cryptozoologist Ken Gerhard. Really great interview. Guys, any final thoughts?
Well, he was a great guest. I mean, so engaging. What was he said? I ramble. I'm like, I don't think that's rambling when everything you say is so relevant. That's more interesting. So as far as I'm concerned, I could have listened to him all night. Boy, what a unique perspective, and really insightful, really shifted my thoughts on a lot of things around, the cryptids that, he's engaged with.
Vic?
Fantastic guest. The breadth of knowledge and the breadth of the cryptids that he searched for, starting, like it's ingrained in him in his childhood, and he carried that forward through adult life. And he's very level-headed, scientific approach. I think it's great. I think it's exactly what the community needs. They need someone who's going to either go and try to either prove or disprove these things, not just feed into the mystery. It's awesome. It's refreshing. Really great guest.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I love, he's got this curiosity, right, that's driving it, but it's not clouding his judgment, right? So he's actually gone out and he's debunked sightings, so it's that's very refreshing, to see in this world, because we so want to believe sometimes it can create some biases, but he's actually been out in the field, and he's seen a lot, but he's not afraid to debunk things to remind us what these unanswered questions are. To learn more, visit www.mythicalwildlife.com. You can also visit us on Facebook, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you've had a sighting, email us at info@mythicalwildlife.com, and you might wind up on the show. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of The Creature Files. And until next time, always remember to heed your call to
adventure.
The Creature Files. It might just save your life.